Hello, I am Connor from Aimbot Studios, and I'm going to teach you how to create a basic health system and user interface to go along with it. This tutorial will also teach you how to create a basic damage system, a radial health interface, a numeric health interface, and a health bar that hovers over the enemy and faces the player. To begin, we're going to create a new Unity project. Now that we have our Unity project up, we're going to go over the hierarchy and create a new UI canvas. On this canvas, we're going to change the canvas scaler's UI scale mode to scale with screen size, set the reference resolution to 1920 by 1080. This could be any resolution that you feel like. And we're going to set the screen match mode to expand with the default reference pixel per unit. Next, we are going to import a basic sprite to use for our health bar in the future. This is just a 128 by 128 pixel white square I made, and we will change the texture type to 2D and UI for Sprite. Next, we'll go back to our canvas, right click, go to UI, and add text for our numeric health bar. Press F to focus, and then change the text to a placeholder, for example, health 100 of 100. Change the scale to something larger so it's visible, and change the font size to something larger as well. Next, we want to anchor it to whichever corner you want. We will be going with the bottom left corner by clicking Alt and left click. Then we will reposition it somewhere out of the way. Next, we will create the health bar by adding two new images to the canvas. The parent will be the background, and the child image will be the fill. Again, adjust the width to something larger. And then change the sprite of the fill bar to the sprite you imported. Change the image type from simple to filled. The fill method from radial 360 to horizontal. And then if we change the color to red, you can see as you change the fill amount, there's the background being revealed. I'm going to change the background to something darker. Next, we will anchor it in the bottom left corner, just like our health text, and move it somewhere else. Next, we will be making the radial health bar. We will right click and create another image, set its sprite to a circular image. For this tutorial, we'll be using the knob. And then create a child image for the fill again. Change the sprite, change the image type to filled, and leave it radial. If you change the color, you can see it spirals. Now we'll just adjust the size to be something bigger. And then we will anchor it in the bottom left corner with the rest of our UI. We will move the rest of our UI up. Next, we will be doing a heart style health bar by making an image, setting it to the check mark just for this example, adjusting the size, and drag it from the hierarchy down to the project folder to create a prefab. Alright, now that we have the UI set up, we will create a cube as a placeholder for the player, and on the player we will add a component, call it health, make a new script, create an add, open it. Now before we do anything, we need to add using Unity engine.ui in order to use UI components. At the top we will add 3 floats, one for max health, one for our current health, and one for our regeneration speed. Next, we'll add an integer for the number of hearts we want. After that, add an image for the health bar and the radial health indicator. Next, add text for the health text readout and a string for any text you would like to preface the health readout. Add a transform for the heart container and a list of game objects to hold our hearts. As well as a game object that will be our heart prefab. We also have a coroutine and this will be used to prevent our regeneration coroutine from running multiple times. Next, we'll move on to the start function, where we'll set the health to the max health. We'll do a if check to see if the heart prefab and the heart holder are not null. Then we will do a for loop over the hearts. In this for loop, we will create a new vector 3 for the position of our hearts. The x will be set to the screen width multiplied by 0.5 divided by the number of hearts you want times I plus the width of the heart object. Plus the screen width multiplied by 0.25. Subtract a quarter of the width of the heart. The y will be half of the heart height. Next, we'll make a game object called heart and instantiate a new heart prefab at the position we generated at quaternion.identity, which will be 0 rotation, and it will be parented to the heart container. Next, we will add the heart to our list. In our update function, we're going to create 3 temporary if checks, one for when you press space, and this we'll call the function to add health, which will end up taking in a float. We'll do the same thing if we press minus, but instead of adding health, we will take damage. And lastly, we will start the regeneration coroutine when we press the F key. And we will update the HUD. Next, we'll move on to the take damage function. It will be a void. and it will take in a float for the damage. We will set the health equal to the maximum between health minus damage and 0. This will prevent the health from going negative. Next, we'll move on to the add health function. Same thing, public void. Take in a amount to add, then health equals the minimum between health plus the amount and the maximum health. Next, we will make the update HUD function, which will be a public void, and it will not take in any parameters. First, we will calculate the percentage of health by dividing our current health by our maximum. Then we will check if we have a health bar. If we have a health bar, we will set the fill amount equal to our percentage. And we will repeat this for the radial health. Next, we will check if the text is not null. If it isn't, then we will do health text dot text is equal to the prefacing text plus our current health rounded to an int plus any sort of divider you want, like a slash, plus our max health. Next, we will check if our hearts array is not null. And we will check if our heart container is not null. If neither are null, we will calculate the number of active hearts by multiplying our percentage by the number of hearts and then casting it to an integer. Make sure you wrap the number of active hearts. Next, we will loop over the hearts list and if the heart iterator is lower than the number of active hearts, we will set it to active. If it is not, we will set it to inactive. Next, we will make our coroutine. It will be a public enumerator called regenerate, and it will not take in any values, though if you wanted to have different potions, for example, with different amounts of health that it can regenerate, then you could pass in a float. So while the health is less than the max health, we will add health to our character. We will multiply this by time.delta time, so it doesn't increase instantly. We will then yield return null. Outside of the loop, we will check if our coroutine is not equal to null, and if it isn't, then we will stop the coroutine and null the coroutine. Now we can head back to Unity and assign variables. health text to health text. Add a prefacer. Health bar fill to health bar. Health radial fill to health radial. Our prefab to our prefab. And we will add a empty to contain our hearts and just name it heart container and then assign that to the container. Remember to tag your player as player. Now we can test. If we go into Unity, pressing the minus, we'll get rid of one heart and decrease the bars by the appropriate amount. If we press F, it will regenerate the health, and if we click space, it will increase by 10. Next, we'll move on to the damage script. We can add this to our player, same way as the health script. Outside of the class, we will add a enum for the damage type. For now, we will just do enemy and player. Inside the class, we'll get rid of everything. And we will make a public float for the amount of damage we do, and a public damage type for the type of damage we do. Next, we'll move back to the health script, and at the top, we'll add a list of damage types that this character can take. And in our take damage function, we will create a damage type for it to take in. And we will check if the accepted damages list contains the passed in damage type. If it does, then we'll do damage. If not, we will not do damage. Here we will just take in enemy damage for the example. Next, for example purposes, we will do a onCollisionEnter function in which we have damage variable, and we will check if the object that we collided with has a damage script on it. If it does, then we will take damage accordingly. Next, we head back to Unity and create an object for a placeholder enemy. I will do a capsule just to differentiate. And reset its transforms along with the player. We'll add a health component to the enemy, and we will attach a damage script to the player and the enemy, as well as set up the accepted damages on the enemy to the player and set it to do enemy damage, and we'll change the player to accept enemy damage and deal player damage. Next, we'll add rigid bodies to each character and disable gravity. Constrain the enemy completely so it doesn't move on accident. And constrain the rotations of the player. Next, parent the camera to the player and add a player movement script to the player. I am going to gloss over this because it is not part of the tutorial, but I will give you a few seconds to copy the script if you need to. Move the enemy away from the player. Now, in order to have a UI on the enemy, we will add a new canvas. And set its render mode to world space. And remove the canvas scalar component. Set its positions to 0, 0, 0. Adjust the Y so it's above the enemy. Change the size to something small. And copy the health bar by Control D to duplicate, and attaching it to the canvas. You set the position, and adjust the scale to something smaller. Center it, and you are almost good to go. Just need to pass the appropriate variable. You're ready to test. As you can see, the player and the enemy are both losing health, and the player can regenerate health. The last thing we're going to do is make the enemy health bar follow the player around by adding a Billboard script. We're going to remove the start function and add a transform, public transform, to reference the camera. And in the update function, we're going to do transform.lookAt camera. Save that, go back to Unity, and you should see save that, head back to Unity, assign the camera to the appropriate spot, and then you should see that it follows, the health bar now follows the camera around. That concludes the Aimbot Studio tutorial on the health system and damage system. You should now have a good idea on how to create a custom health system and damage system for your own game.